Okay, brilliant. All right, well, welcome and thank you for joining us for our next Avada Associates featured artist in conversation. So we've had the pleasure of having Clare as our featured artist for the last 2 months. So you might have spotted all of her brilliant artwork on the Avada Associate Featured Artist Instagram. And we're welcoming back Annie today as well for their In Conversation. So we will kick off in just a moment and get to listen in to their chat. And at the end, we'll be able to have some time for any questions that anyone would like to ask as well. But I'm going to hand straight over to Annie and Clare. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everybody.
Thanks, Lisa. Can you hear me, everyone? Yeah. Well, it's really a pleasure to be talking with you, Clare. I mean, we've known each other a long time, but sort of in some ways we haven't really talked really in depth about your work. So it's really a pleasure to be able to talk to you about it. And I'll start off, we've already had a chat, so, you know, we sort of know the areas that we're going to discuss, but I'll start off with talking about your earlier work, Clare, if that's okay, because I think that's really important. So just to say that your early performance work in the late 80s and 90s involved a lot of large scale work with groups and mainly with women in the space. And now your work has changed quite a lot. It's much more intimate and often to the camera or actions in public spaces. So can you talk a little bit about that change in your work over the years that you've been practicing?
Yeah, thanks, Annie. I can do. Good morning, everybody. What I thought may be helpful is because some of you will have seen the pictures or some of them that I've been posting. Some of you may have seen some of the performance works, but a lot of you won't have done. So rather than sitting watching me gabble, I thought it would be more appropriate to be showing images. So I am going to share screen and jump straight to the Avada Instagram page, which essentially I've been squatting on for the last several weeks. So I hope you can all see that page. Can you sort of wave at me and let me know that you can see that?
Can see it.
Fantastic. Okay, so yeah, so early performance works back in the late 80s, which is and feels a long time ago. And this was a piece that I made at Modern Art Oxford and in Denmark and Sweden. And it was a piece that was written and directed by me. It was commissioned by the museums and the galleries, and that's significant because this was very much a pre-digital era. It wasn't an age when artists easily and readily could even document their own work with any quality. There were very few outlets for distribution of work. So if you wanted to work in a live art way, you did rely on hosting and curation by institutions. If you were in an art school, you probably got to do it there, but once you left art school, opportunities were really important to seize if you got them. And because I had been at the Royal College of Art and was still living in London and knew people who worked in performance and curators, etc., I was able to continue a dialogue around performance work and was very happy to take up, sorry, I've just lost those images, opportunities to make some large-scale performance works, which I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So that's really important, is the aspect of opportunity that can come to you as an emerging and young artist. So works such as this, and indeed other ones, and I believe that we've got Mary Robinson today here, and this is a piece that Mary performed with her daughter Emma, also at Modern Art Oxford, and then at the Serpentine in London. So notable about these works is that they are works for pairings or groups of women, which at the time actually felt quite a radical methodology to be using, because performance art at that time was very much occupied by big beast male performance art figures such as Stuart Brisley and Nigel Rolfe. Standing alone perhaps amongst that in Europe was Marina Abramovic, who still straddles the globe. But as a young female artist in the late 80s and early 90s, there were very few sort of contexts within which it felt possible to work. And I was very grateful to be able to work collaboratively, not only with curators, but also with performers. And indeed, these works were devised and derived through conversation with the participants, some of whom were not artists, and that was absolutely relevant. Mary is an artist and a very good artist. Her daughter Tyrion is not an artist. And it was great that they both applied to take part in this piece. It was a piece devised for mother and daughter, so that was a wonderful piece of happenstance for me as an artist. But at this time, I was writing and directing, so I didn't perceive myself as a participant. Patricia Cuberos, an opera singer in this one, Phyllis Kidgel. So this is a large-scale piece at Modern Art Oxford. So the opportunity to work collaboratively felt quite radical. I just left art school at the late 80s, which again, the model for being a successful or even a practicing artist was as a solitary, individualistic male artist. So it did feel quite a radical methodology to be adopting and to be giving voice literally to other women, inviting them through reminiscence to speak of their experience as women, as mothers, as daughters, in their own tongue where that was appropriate. So it did feel a wonderful opportunity, and certainly inspired me to the value of live action, gesture, sound as a means of communicating to audience. I didn't perform myself for some years. I'm now going to the keynote that I've got here, which again, I hope you can see. If I can just put that onto, if you enter full screen. So I actually didn't perform myself until the late 90s. I don't know why screen sharing says it's paused. I don't know if you can all still see anything or not, or whether you're just looking at a blank screen. Can somebody wave?
We can still see, we can see the tables and the women working together.
Okay, so right,
Yeah.
well, I've now got a keynote going on, so I don't quite know how I deal with that. So maybe I need to go back to screen sharing and change the the item that I'm looking at. So
Claire,
yeah,
could we talk a little bit, because I think it's relevant, about the next question, which I think sort of links into your work now, which is about women and women's bodies and women's experiences, particularly, I think, in regard to motherhood, but how much your body is part of your work now, in the present as well. You work very much with the body now, don't you? And it is much more about your work. You're not directing others so much now.
No, that stopped really in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. And I then performed myself. I think you can see the keynote now, probably. So this piece is a transition piece where I actually performed with my 8-year-old daughter. So I then made the shift from works about being a daughter to being a mother. But you're right, Annie, latterly I've been making works that use my own body as a site for performance art. And I hope you can see this image here, which is one from a piece I did at Platform 1 Gallery in London a couple of years ago, called Dessert, which is where I was locating sites of pain or injury on my body and making them into pudding, essentially. So I was serving raspberries and cream off my stretch mark tummy or off my scarred knee post-surgery. So it is something that I'm very interested in as I age, is, you know, I'm now a postmenopausal woman with grown-up children, and I'm very interested in examining the experience of inhabiting a body that is aging. I've done a lot of work around gum disease and dentistry, doing performances where I use interdentals to clean my teeth, etc. So yes, the experience of inhabiting a woman's body, either as a fecund younger woman as I was, an energetic, active woman, and now in midlife, addressing aspects of decay, illness, stiffness, currently immobility. I'm about to have foot surgery in the new year, which is going to mean a period of enforced recovery and immobility. So there are lots and lots of still very fertile subjects that are coming up, but all still within the realm of women's experience and experience and common experience. Yeah.
And Claire, what I'm really interested in your I think there's an aspect of your work about play and humour. We can see it in these works that you're showing at the moment, and I guess in a way exploring the place of activism within your work. Could you say a little bit more about how that's relevant to your work?
Yes, I could. I mean, I think humour is an enormously powerful tool. I certainly find it one increasingly in terms of engaging with audience. I mean, a piece such as this that I made took place on a railway platform. So my audience were the passengers that were stepping off the train. And what they encountered was this rather ludicrous figure of a clearly middle-aged woman with tin foil on her head with a raspberry on her nose. Kind of hard to ignore that, you know. It's going to prompt laughter, and indeed it did. And it's a very good way of drawing in people to a series of actions, which is what I found. I think also it delights me. I think by nature, I do have a very well-developed sort of humour muscle. So I do see the ludicrous and the comedic in many aspects of life. And certainly as I'm getting older, I'm damn grateful that I do, because a lot of it isn't great fun. But I do find that if I want to be examining some of the vicissitudes of life, then using humour as a strategy to connect with an audience is really useful. And I think as I get older, I think that the potency of that is added to by the fact that I'm an older woman rather than a younger woman. I think also I'm aware that historically the fool has often been depicted as a male, you know, the jester or Reynard the Fox, Lord of Misrule. And I think it feels to me a sort of a fairly radical act to be claiming that space as an older woman and becoming a mischief maker. So I do find it both useful as a performative strategy, most definitely, and also enjoyable, and that matters too. Also, I find as a strategy within the work, if I use comedy as the kind of entry point for myself performatively and to engage with an audience, it means I create an arena and a territory that sort of feels accessible. People can laugh, they can laugh at me, and that's fine. That's really useful to me. I can then, when I'm ready to flip it, so that we then deal with the kind of pathos or the underlying story. So, for example, a piece I did in Oxford 2 or 3 years ago for Lapa, Peter Lloyd and Veronica Cordova de la Rosa, I started off wearing a hot water bottle cover on my head, and I told a quite comic story, and I was, I think, eating Turkish delight from my toes as I did, telling a story about how this hot water bottle had leaked in a very swanky kind of Airbnb bed, and the dye from this cover had stained the sheets, and my horror at this accident, and what was I going to do to try and cover it up, and scrubbing sheets in the hand basin during the night, etc., etc. It culminates in me explaining that that was the last gift that my mother gave me just before she died. So, you know, having brought an audience with me on that journey, I'm then able to move from the kind of the banal and the comedic to something that deals with, again, a very prime loss, and one that increasingly friends and family are experiencing, because we're at that time of life where parents have gone or are going, you know. So yeah, comedy is important, and I think too, it's really healthy to be laughing at ourselves. I find too, as a female artist, it is disconcerting, often to men in the audience. Actually, I think men find it quite hard when women laugh at themselves. They find it sort of threatening in a way. So again, it's just a useful tool, I would say.
Yes. Also, Claire, I know that a lot of your work, I mean, we can see it in this piece of work. I know it's not the main area, but your work is often very full of colour. It's very vibrant. Can you talk a little bit about the use of colour in your practice?
Well, yes. I'll just stop sharing there. Yeah, that's a great question, Annie, and you know, one that I really enjoyed talking with you about. I'll flip back to the Instagram page because that really evidences it hugely. Let me just do that. Gosh, I'm being a bit inept here. Bear with me. Yeah. Of course, I'm aware of colour. I love colour. I love inhabiting colour. I love wearing colour. I think probably I always have done. However, as a younger artist, a lot of my work was very serious and very monochrome.
Yes.
Here we go. So there's your lovely work, and then here's the first work that I posted on the Instagram page. And I've got a very dodgy internet connection, as you can see. So there's a great example of colour and drawing.
Yes.
Yeah, paint on my hand. Colour does feature large, it's very true. And I would say that for me, colour is instinctive. It's something I don't even really have to think about. I just love doing it. I think of the quote by Hockney that I live life in colour. And Georgia O'Keeffe said that, you know, she found she could say things with colour that she couldn't any other way. And to some extent, I would echo that. I think it takes me right back to my first glimmerings of creativity as a child, which were all about colour. I think the only reason I became an artist is I love my crayons so much, and sharpening them and arranging them and putting them in the correct order chromatically, something I still do actually. So I think that it was a real relief to me as I matured as an artist to realise that I could embrace colour and employ colour. And again, I think it's a great way of connecting with people. I think people visually do respond to colour. So I do find it, again, a very, very useful aspect of what I do is to consciously use colour. I can go back to the keynote and show you some examples where I'm actually, I'm just trying to share screen. I don't know if Lisa's there. It's suddenly giving me a weird message about sharing options, which isn't quite what I want really. I wanted to go back to showing you the keynote. So there we go. Yeah, so latterly I have actually been literally painting myself into performance works. This is a piece from a work felt in 2018 at Oxford Brookes University. That's another picture from Blow that you just saw, where I'm literally applying paint to myself in performance works. So I think colour is, well, I'm in a better place myself when I'm using it, when I'm wearing it. And I do feel, again, as I get older, that it's important to be visible yes. As a practitioner. I don't mean visible as a woman particularly, I don't mean in a sexual way, but I do mean as a practitioner, that colour is very useful to me to attract attention, to draw an audience to my work. And it's also really pleasurable to work with it, and that matters too. I spend all my life either making art, thinking about art, talking about it, writing about it. I want to enjoy doing it, and that really matters to me. And I do try to convey that in the work that I make, whether it's two-dimensional or performative. Yeah, so no, colour is really, really important yes. to me.
Yeah. And Claire, what about your drawing as well? Because that certainly lately in your work that we've been doing some bookmaking work together, and I know drawing has been very instrumental in that work. And also that's often you put that on the internet, and it's often, you know, been digital work. Do the two work together? How do you see drawing and digital media?
Well, firstly, I see drawing as absolutely underpinning everything that I do. That's not a controversial statement to make. I think almost every artist I've ever met would honour the importance of drawing. Even when I'm not making drawing, I'm sort of still thinking drawing. I find I've got an incredibly good sense of space two-dimensionally and compositionally, woeful in 3 dimensions. I'm really bad at assessing space, as Peter, my lovely husband, will tell you how much I struggle to visualize a room. I need to actually sort of get in there and move things around and see it as a drawing rather than trying to imagine it as a three-dimensional space. So it underpins all that I do. I do draw a lot, and I very rarely actually show my drawings. And if I go back to the Instagram, which you're referencing, and thanks so much for that. Yeah, there are lots of drawings on it, and I put those on intentionally. So early drawings such as this one, and I will go on to talk about the visual and the digital because it is really important.
Mm-hmm.
This one is a pure drawing. There's no digitizing in that. That is just pure explosion of pleasure and color on an A2 sheet of paper. But images like this are more contrived. That is from a series of sketches in a sketchbook made in my studio garden and then heavily digitized. And I'll show you some more of that in a second. But I wanted to say something about privacy in drawing. So drawings such as this, which I call moments, are made, you know, in the studio when I'm engaging with other things, particularly if I'm writing or building a website and doing very desk-based work. Then I will keep open a sketchbook on top of a table or plan chest, and almost as a break from being static and concentrating, I will go and make a mark. And over the years, I've built up many hundreds of these moments that I call them. And I started to show them in, I think I first showed them in about 2017. I hadn't shown drawing at all until the early 2000s. And when I was at the Workshop Studios in East Oxford, and we were having a studio show, and Jan Crombie, who ran the studio, said, well, I was saying, oh, I don't know what to show. And she said, well, why don't you show some of your drawings? I said, oh, no, I never show my drawings, no. And she said, well, why not? And I said, well, I just don't. I just make them for me. But I have started to enjoy showing them and sharing them with people. And what I can do now is just to give you an insight into the way that I will work them. And this won't be news to anybody who uses digital media and Photoshop particularly. Sorry, I'm being completely, I'm trying to talk and find the right, yeah, I guess if I go to desktop, and still looking for the keynote, aren't I? Can you see my desktop there?
Yes.
Can you see me flapping around with a cursor?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was just going to give you a little insight. So this is just a still from Photoshop showing a sketch that I made in my studio garden some years ago. This is it mid-process being cleaned up digitally. But you can see it's basically quite a hasty sketch done with pen and chalk and a bit of paint. And then I made some stripes with chalk. And what I then end up with is this. So it starts with a very spontaneous, fast sketch made standing up in the studio garden on a spring day before I did all the weeding. And then over a period of time through art working and digitizing it, it becomes something else. So I have found Photoshop increasingly useful to me as a drawing tool rather than just as a means of editing documentation, which is what it traditionally was. And as I showed earlier, increasingly I use drawing on my body, and also to do things like make a performance arena within which I will then draw myself into it, and I will then invite an audience into it with me to sing or to interact. So drawing does feature heavily now in my performance work, and I do envisage that going on, yeah.
Yes, yes. Claire, just to go on to another area of your practice, because I know that you've written a lot, not only about your own work, but also about other artists' work. And that probably ties in more with your work in your curatorial work, but that we'll come on to. But do you want to say a little bit about the importance of writing, not only about your own work, but also about other artists' work and what that means to you and your practice?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, writing is important to me. It was always important to me. I understand that now as I look back through, 40 years or more of sketchbooks. Even as a very young student, they're remarkably unvisual. where they are, it's generally that I've stuck a postcard in. Do you remember those back in the day when you go to an exhibition and buy postcards? You couldn't download images off the internet because it didn't exist. So I do have hundreds and hundreds of artist cards, and my sketchbooks as an undergraduate are mainly my musings and notes on art interspersed with glued in postcards of artists' work. So I'm always surprised at how little I used my notebooks to draw. I was constantly trying to unpack my own thinking, that's quite clear. And I think I just have a genuine passion and enthusiasm for the process of art making, for the business of art practice. And I'm never ever bored talking to an artist. I do think that creative people, whether they're writers, filmmakers, visual artists, are generally fascinating people. And you and I, Annie, have spent 20 years talking about art, and actually very often not our own work, which is why having this conversation felt really exciting for us, because we don't often reflect personally. We're always looking outwards. We're always curious to know what other people are doing and what they're thinking. So it was a natural progression for me as an artist to begin to formulate my opinions and ideas and to note them down. And I think it was probably 15 years or so ago that somebody said, why don't you start publishing these? Because you say some good stuff. So I did, and I contacted the Oxford Times. I started writing reviews for them, and I've had reviews published in, Flash Art and New York International, and I now have, I do now have a rather modest little website, which you should be able to see, which is called Iris, which is at the moment is slightly moribund because I haven't been going to many exhibitions. I hope you can see that, but it is, as I say, art insights, reviews, interviews and reflections on contemporary art practice. So it is a forum where I can put catalogue essays, reviews by myself and others. Recently I've been working with a young art writer called Hope Collinson, and some of her writings on there. I'm hoping to work with other young writers soon too. So it is something I just enjoy tremendously. And in the same way as I said that, using drawing and colour is hugely enjoyable, as well as being a very good way of connecting with an audience, then writing is too. Do you know what? If the God said to me, for the next, decades of your life, you can either make pictures or writing, what would you do? I would write, absolutely, I wouldn't hesitate. Because actually it's about the most enjoyable thing I do. I absolutely love doing it. So it does inform my practice. I love commentating on other artists, and I do try in my art writing very much to unpack what can often seem to be quite inscrutable, challenging art practice. I'm never fearful of saying to a reader or an audience, why is it that contemporary art feels so much more challenging and harder perhaps than art of the past? What's going on? What is it that contemporary artists think they're doing? And what do we think about that? So I find that whole interrogation of practice truly fascinating, and I do love writing, it's true. And I do use the spoken word a lot in my work, and I use the sung word as well. And again, I foresee that going on. In fact, I hope to do a lot more writing, particularly this winter, as I'm going to be mobilised by doctors and doing surgical fractures to my feet, which is what they call breaking my toes. So I expect a lot of angst-ridden writing to appear.
So sort of following on from your writing, I know that we can see your studio gallery space behind you, Claire. And I know that you're very generous in offering that out. I've been lucky enough to show work in your beautiful gallery, and I know Peter, who's here, has also shown work.
And
hi,
Rhiannon.
Peter. Oh yeah, hi Rhiannon. And and you've been really generous in offering that for residencies. I know you offer mentoring as well. Can you talk a little bit about that, and just maybe tell some people who don't know about your gallery and studio?
Yeah, thanks, Annie. That's a generous question. Yes, I am sitting in my gallery today. It's called Cuckoo at the moment. That may change. It is a series of 3 exhibition spaces. This has been my studio since 2009. But in the last few months, I've been able to empty it because I now have a studio at my home in South Oxfordshire. And having cleared it, I realised what a phenomenally good space it is to show work. Now, despite the fact it's been my personal studio for 10, 11, 12 years, I have run an awful lot of projects here. And again, I'll share screen and show you. So the website for the project at the moment is QQ Curation. And I do, as you say, I do exhibitions. I've done 3 this year since COVID ended: Home Books, Rhiannon Evans, Reform, and now Yon, with a group of mid-career artists. But I have also over the years done a lot of residencies. So I've had artists coming since 2012 to stay here and to use the studio to make work. And then if they wanted, going back to 2012, if they wanted to, then at the end of it, to have an exhibition. So that's too small to bother with. Yeah, so it's something that I have done a great deal of. And again, rather segueing on from the writing, it seems a natural extension of my practice. You know, it's about dialogue, it's about inquiry, it's about conversation, and really drilling down into the issues of practice. And because the studio here in the gallery is rural, I'm on the edge of a small town called Charlbury, which is just north of Oxford. So it is on the edge of the Cotswolds, and it does give artists an opportunity to take that all-important break from their own life to come and stay here. I'm next to a small campsite. They can have a pod or a tent. Hence the title of the name of the program is Art Pitch, because they can pitch a tent. And they can use the studios and then either have an exhibition or an open studio day or a talk or a film screening or performance, whatever's appropriate. Now, prior to COVID, I had actually started a new program called Dwell. And my mission statement for that was to offer flexible residencies to women artists over 50. My reason being that as I reached that time myself, I realized that demands of life they did change perhaps, but that many women artists in their 50s, 60s, or even older were still hugely preoccupied by the demands of family, perhaps caring in a caring role, still having to earn a living, that it was as hard as it ever had been to get respite from their life to make their work, but that it wasn't necessarily relevant or appropriate or possible for them to travel and stay somewhere else to do it. So I decided to go and meet them and say, well, let's devise a residency where we continue a dialogue. We can use the internet to do it, or I can come to visit you at home or in your studio. If you need to use the studio, you can do, but it's not that traditional model of having to pack your suitcase and go and relocate for a period of weeks. It's about staying in your life and being encouraged and supported to be a professional practitioner whilst you do. And I'm delighted to say that my first Dwell residency artist was Rhiannon Evans, whose residency started in 2019, was interrupted by COVID, and so in fact she's only just had her closing exhibition. And my current Dwell residency artist is Peter Lloyd, and Peter will have her closing exhibition next year. We hope next spring or summer, whatever works for her. So that was very prescient that I'd already set that in place before COVID. It couldn't have been better suited to the times that we found ourselves living in. And yeah, that's worked really well. And the gallery now is more of a gallery than it ever has been. My plans for next year are to open it up as a higher space to artists in the region, either to individuals or groups, also to artists who may want to run classes. It's an ideal photographic studio for professional documentation of work. I'm hoping to link up with other organisations in the region, such as Wilcott Studios and Dahlia Bear in Woodstock. And there are quite a lot of us in this part of the county who are similarly minded to exhibit artists and to offer them support. So I'm hoping to develop relationships with other artist-led projects and do some joint project work.
So Claire, just my last question before we maybe have some questions from anyone else who's here. It's more about where you see your work in the future. I know that you mentioned to me that you've got a residency that you is coming up, possibly in Ireland. And I know you're very interested in working around your own ancestry and the Irish diaspora. So do you want to just say a little bit about how you see your work in the future?
Yes, I can do. Thanks for that. Well, you're right. I did apply and I have been accepted to go and do a residency at Live Art Ireland next year, hopefully in the springtime. If I'm hop, skipping and jumping by then after surgery. If not, it may have to be pushed back. That will be at Live Art Ireland in Tipperary. And that certainly, I hope, will be an opportunity to develop works that I've been making now over the last decade, beginning to probe and give visibility to my experience as a child of the Irish diaspora. I don't think it's an uncommon experience that it's often with the gathering of maturity that the relevance of one's ancestry perhaps begins to be more important. And subsequent to the death of my mother 12 years or so ago, it has certainly become more meaningful to me and more illuminating, I suppose, not only to my own life story and personality traits, but those of my siblings and children, nieces, nephews, really beginning to acknowledge aspects of continued displacement and loss, in difficulty settling, claiming a place as one's own, that I don't think is so unusual for the children of migrants, of emigrants, which my mother was. She was carried as a child as an infant in arms with a police guard to a boat at night to flee the troubles in the 20s, just before Ireland was no longer a united Ireland. So, and she mourned and grieved for that for her whole life. She never really recovered, even though she'd been a tiny child, from that huge disruption in her family. And we lived with that constant sense of loss. So there is a lot there to be unpacked. I have a couple of images to show you of works I have done, and this one particularly, again, going back to Oxford Brookes, which involved me making for myself a little bit of earth for me to inhabit, and writing in Gaelic the word welcome, and then writing an audience into my little bit of earth to sing Oh Danny Boy, which is a very sentimental Irish song, sung universally, with tears in the eyes and a glass in the hand, and one that my mother absolutely loved, the Londonderry Air, and indeed we had it played at her funeral. So that's certainly a rich strand of work that I hope to pursue, both performatively in the UK and when I go over to Tipperary. It's not so far from my family in County Clare, so it'll be a lovely chance to also, in a way, integrate my art practice perhaps within a more familial context. In other works, what's in the studio at the moment is collage, actually. So going back to drawing and beginning to realise that I can also make images with scissors as well as with pen and paint. So I'm working on a series of collages at the moment. So I foresee for the future, most definitely, a lot of writing, a lot of drawing and collage, and thematically continuing the work around the aging body.
Yes.
And the strategies one has to employ to continue to inhabit it, never mind enjoy it, and also to look at aspects of ancestry and displacement and how one settles oneself with that and decides to be somewhere and to be there meaningfully and joyfully. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Claire, for sharing your work, and all the strands and the energy that you have around all the different strands and what you've given to other artists, because I think that's so important. You're so generous with that.
Oh, so, thanks for that.
Yeah. So,
well, thanks for your questions. They've been really, really interesting.
Really
as I said, I really have enjoyed thinking about them. And, I think as artists, I don't know how others feel, but I know that all I'm really interested in is what I'm going to make next. So I very rarely look back to old work. And, you know, I have been making work for several decades now, so there's an awful lot of it. And nobody ever says, you know, what did you make 20 years ago? Or what did you do when you were an undergraduate? And of course, that's the theme of the exhibition in the gallery at the moment, is inviting mid-career artists to look back to their first decade, as the Young Rembrandt exhibition at the Ashmolean did. And I know they have found it so fruitful and fascinating to do that. And it's been great for me watching them be their own historian. And really, that's what you, Annie, and Lisa, and Grace and Mita at Avada asked me to be, was to become my own historian for a couple of months. So I'm enormously grateful. And actually, it's really nice to discover that I've made so much, and a lot of it's I really like. I'm really glad I've made it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, great.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much. Annie, really insightful questions, and thank you, Claire, for being so generous in your answers. So we do have a little bit of time if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask as well. You can either feel free to just pop your microphone straight on, or if you prefer, you can pop it in the chat. So if there's any other questions that you'd like to put to Claire, or to Claire and Annie together, then do feel really welcome.
That ghastly moment.
Hello, hello, Claire. Hello, Claire.
Hello, hi.
Long time no see.
Oh,
great to see you, Diana.
Congratulations, absolutely fascinating talk, and congratulations on all that you've done.
Thank you very much. Great to see you, Diana. Diana and I worked together over the years many times, and I was one of the early artists at Magdalen Road Studios in Oxford, which Diana set up with Kevin Slingsby back in the 90s, late 90s, Diana?
Right, so yes.
Yeah, that's okay. Let's be out and proud about our history. You've made a great contribution to the art scene in Oxford, and without you, you know, places like Avada may not have happened. So, you know, really, really great contribution. And that's something I'm mindful of. Artist-led spaces are really important. And if we can manage to do it without the grip of funding and funders' agendas, so much better. Thank you.
Doing a great job. Yes.
Thanks so much.
And very interesting. Because their different careers as mothers. I've thought that a lot, obviously. And how their careers have to develop on a different time scale because of being a mother. So that's really important what you're doing.
Well, I do think
I hope to come and see your gallery.
Fantastic, Diana. I hope you will. I hope you'll come and make some work in it. I think I can say 99% certainly as I go forward that I will be working pretty exclusively with mid-career female artists from now on. I think it's a really important space to create. It's an important platform to host. And I find, you know, mid-career women artists absolutely fascinating. And there's some fantastic work out there that needs to be shown and collaborations to be made. So, and again, because I'm at the moment not at the behest of funders and their remit, I don't need to tick their boxes. As a self-funded artist-led space, I can make that decision.
Brilliant.
Hi, Rhiannon.
Hiya, hi. The last image that you showed of you singing Danny Boy, and the welcome, there was, I've never seen it before. I know that the colourful sort of banner that you wear around your neck, I've seen that before, which is really, really strong. It's lovely. In that image, for me, there was, and I don't know if I was reading it in the way that was intended, but is there a religious element to that image? Was there something you looked as if there was something to do with church-based ritual in that? and I've never seen it before. I've never noticed, and I don't know why. I don't know why I saw it, but I thought that's really interesting. And I just wondered if there was anything, particularly because of the Irish question and the relationship that has.
No, it's a fabulous question,
Yes,
and I can answer it. And no one's ever asked it before, and I've never given this answer. But yes, there is. I mean, I am mimicking a stole, a religious stole that would be worn as part of the priest's vestments. I am an Irish Catholic by birth and by practice, and so again, that is a sort of subversive and radical act in a way. So thank you for observing that. Yes, so that is one of my favourite performance garments that I wear.
I love that.
As is, I have to say, my lovely hand-drawn tulip crown, which is made of an old cardboard box, which is getting a bit battered now, but I still really love it. And what I like about these things too is I can roll them up and put them in the bottom of a handbag. And in fact, this piece, I do have a rather funny story which I can end with. I went to a very, very smart wedding just at the time I was wearing this in performance work, and it was a summer wedding, and I was wearing a really quite plain but rather stylish long dress, khaki dress, and I thought, I know, I'll wear that. So I did. So I put that over the top of it and then hand painted a sun hat with the same paint. And I stood in this smart wedding in this rural church in Hertfordshire with people dressed very opulently. And I thought, I can guarantee I'm the only person here wearing Dulux house paint and felt pen, So I'm very fond of that. And I do foresee doing more of that. But yes, it does reference that. Of course it does. It's referencing again my ancestry and some of the cultural influences that have helped shape me. And undeniably, like it or not, being a child brought up in the 60s and 70s by an Irish mother, then Catholic practices are and were very, very important. So yes, I do often reference those. I often reference it through gestures I make in performances. And again, I don't make them explicit, but to those who know, they will know, So thanks for that. No one's ever asked that.
I have a follow-up question, but I'll ask that after anybody else has asked theirs.
Go for it, Rhiannon.
Okay. It's just about things that you put on your head. I know.
Yeah. Okay.
Where you often wear hats, and I'm thinking back to a performance you did in my house with lighted candles, which you might remember, which was a fantastic performance. But yeah, you often wear headgear, which again is brightly coloured. And I think the one that, I don't know if you've got an image of it, but the one with the candles was a bowler hat, wasn't it? With
yeah, I'm just finding it, Rhiannon, and I have got some.
Yeah. So again, there's like a reference to formality and the fact that it's a bowler hat, and that has some sort of place in the hierarchy, I suppose, nowadays, maybe not so much many years ago. And then the sort of joyful colour and subversive nature of lighting candles on it.
Yes.
Yeah, I just thought, headgear, is there any particular reason that you focus on?
I'm just setting up some images I can now show you of that. I've just looked out the folder of those. So, okay, so there's one of me wearing the hat. Can you see that?
Yeah, that's the one.
So this was in 2017 it was a performance called Birthday Party. I can't show all the pictures, but the culmination of it was that I was face painted as my mother. And then I wore the hat that I had worn to her funeral. And with it, I had ringed it with birthday candles that I'd saved for my two children, Flossie and Finn's birthdays over the years. The piece was called Fuel. And there's one of the promotion images for it. So it did culminate with me sitting in Rhiannon's dining room, having my my hat set on fire. So thanks for that, mate.
It was a close for several
thanks for your
people
hospitality.
buckets of water.
Yeah, we had a bucket of water on standby. And there's me sitting next to the picture of my mother at the tea party, the birthday party. So there's my mum, there's me.
Can't see that one there.
Okay, let me just Yeah, it's so annoying when you're sharing screen that you can't open a new image. There you go. Can you see that?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So there's my mother, and there's me, and there's the birthday cake, and there's the birthday hat. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, the weird thing is that actually in my everyday life, I hate wearing hats, and I try not to wear them. I really, really don't. I don't like wearing hats at all. Can you see me now? Are you still looking at the screen?
I can see you.
Okay. I don't wear them in my private life unless I really, really have to. I'll pull on a beanie when I'm out walking in the country if I get really cold, but I'm not a big hat wearer at all. So again, I think it's because it, to me, it indicates that I'm performing. So when I employ a hat, then I'm performing. It becomes a prop. It helps me to enter that performative space, but I very rarely wear them in my private life.
Fabulous. Any last questions before we close?
Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Hi, Claire. This is the sort of follow on from Rhiannon's, and it's to do with the objects of performance. I mean, as performance artists, we tend to make lots of things to wear or to use, and often they're recorded with photography, with us actually wearing them or using them. And I just wondered how you feel about the objects as being art objects in themselves, as items that can be displayed without the performance. Do you think it's necessary? Because I've occasionally been asked if I would display something I'd made for a performance, but not necessarily with me doing the performance. And it's always a question that I sort of think, I'm not sure of the answer myself. So I'm just wondering how you feel about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I have to say I've never done it. I'm not, perhaps I would. I'm not sure most of the objects I use are really worth exhibiting. I mean, they tend to be very homemade intentionally. I often use scrap materials, and so yeah, that's a good question. I do have a lot of them. It would be quite an interesting exhibition to put on, I guess. I have a lot of them stored in odd places. Peter, my husband, is, you know, occasionally I'll lunge at a plate and say, no, that's a performance prop, you know, yank it off him, and he will say, well, how would I know? And I'll say, well, you wouldn't, but you do now, you know, so that has to go back in the studio rather than into a kitchen cupboard. Yes, I do also have quite a few pieces of work that other artists have left behind when they've performed. I curated a festival of performance art in Charbury in 2017, and I've got lots of props from various performance artists from that festival, and I thought that would be an interesting exhibition to put on. So maybe that's one to curate going forward. But no, I'm pretty brutal with my props. Once I've used them, they get shoved in a carrier bag on the bottom of a box, and they exist, as you say, they exist largely photographically. Yeah. But it would be interesting to dig some of them out, maybe to remake them or improve them.
I think it would be nice, Claire. It would be interesting to, you know, for them to have a conversation with each other, you know, from different performances. I'm just imagining that, you know, like the crossovers might be quite interesting.
Well, I think that would be fascinating, a conversation between objects that exist as legacy and trace of action and interaction would be a very interesting premise. And yeah, well, maybe that's one to think about for the future. Maybe that's one for the retrospective. I'll leave that to the curators. I'll just make sure it's all in good nick, you know.
Oh, great. Wonderful questions.
Yeah, thank you. Great questions.
You, Claire, and to everybody for coming. You'll be able to watch this back on Claire's blog on the Avada website, actually. And yeah, just a big thank you for your generosity again, and look out for the remainder of Claire's images on the Instagram page for the next couple of weeks. It's been such a pleasure watching them come through, so thank you. After that, we're going to have a little break in the featured artists programme, but then we'll be back up and running again in February with the wonderful Rhiannon Evans as well. So look out for those, and Rhiannon's blog that's going to be coming up in the new year as well. But otherwise, thanks again, and we will see you soon.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Annie.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.